the Frailty Partnership brings together all the different partners from across Leeds, so that we can look at a particular population and look at how we can design and develop services that meet their needs. I'm a real advocate of a Team Leeds approach and making sure that we're thinking as one about what are the needs of the population we're trying to serve, and together developing what the model is going to look like. I think I've worked in the past where people have been sent away to do a business case or come with a proposal and so on. And so you bring the proposal, then all the other partners say, oh, you could have done this, or we could do this completely differently. This is a real ethos about working together and making sure we've got everyone's voices heard. The value that it brings is that we start from scratch working on the problems that we need to solve. So how do we make sure that we can get to people in the shortest time frame? How do we make sure that when we get there, we've got the right skills and expertise to work with that client or patient to make sure that we meet their needs? And working together means that we're all in the same place, in the same room, thinking about what could we each provide, and doing it once rather than several times over. I think there are some economic benefits as well, because previously I've worked in a more organisation specific way. And what happens is one organisation will come forward and say, I need to bring 8 nurses, so I'll need a team leader. The next organisation says, I need to bring 8 social workers, we need a team leader. If we have one approach, we can look at getting some benefits from not only the cross-working, which is the most vital bit, but also making sure we've got the right leadership structure in place. It felt good, if not a little strange, because I had been used to going to meetings where we talked about things and then we would put a proposal to another decision-making body. We've done quite a bit of work on looking at voting and who can say, who can give approval. I think that will evolve, if I'm perfectly honest, because I don't think we need to have a strict voting regime. As we get to know each other and work really well together, I think that will just happen, where we can say, so I'm signalling my support of this scheme now. So it feels a little bit transactional at the moment when we stop and say, let's have a vote about it. But I think that's all part of the organisational development that we need to go through. This way of working doesn't just happen. We really need to put thought into how we're going to work together. How do we challenge each other appropriately? And how do we get to a place where it's not necessarily consensus, but we all know exactly what we're voting about? And how do we make that voting process something that's just integral to the conversation rather than a specific, and now we're going to put it to the vote. The value of a population board is that you have sight of all the different funding streams that are available to support that particular population. And to date, we haven't had that. We haven't had that transparency. So there is the opportunity to look at how we use the collective fund as well as we possibly can. There are some things that I think we need to think about as we go forward, and that's how we ensure that we've got sustainable organisations in the city. So things like overheads, we almost need to take the funding of the buildings, the funding of the infrastructure out of the fund that's to be spent on direct patient care, and look at how we spend that direct patient care fund. And I think that way we stop having the discussions about, oh, have we ensured that every organisation's got its own overheads covered in any bids that we put forward? Specific example where we knew that there was some new funding coming, and we were brought together to look at how can we best spend this money. And I thought that diving straight into what kind of services do we need to meet patient needs would be sufficient. Actually, what we need is a parallel piece of work about how we're going to work together so we can give up some of that power to the whole, so that instead of speaking on behalf of one organisation, you're talking on behalf of the population. It's a big shift because we've all been socialised to work for a particular organisation, and I've got to think about my organisation all the time to make sure that we get what we need. When actually, if you do that complete mind shift to what does the population need and go from there, that's how we'll get the best outcome. It doesn't just happen. That would be my greatest advice to myself was, don't expect everyone to make that change of mindset at the same pace. Don't expect every organisation to cede the power to the collective at the same pace. It's a real development requirement to get to that. If I go to a meeting, I feel for the most part that I can speak on behalf of my organisation. And that comes to some extent with the experience that I have, but mainly the role that I have in the organisation. It's automatically given to me to make decisions about things. We need to make sure that when we're working in this collective way and we're looking at how we use the City of Leeds money as wisely as we can, that we've got people who can make those commitments. So if need be, I could say, well, we in my organisation won't have as much for that particular service because I think it's worthwhile investing in this service. So it's not just the placing the funds in the desired service, it's about how you're going to retract the funds from the service that's already there. If we're not careful, we'll end up with lots and lots of meetings of very senior people because they're the only ones who can make that type of decision. So we need to look within our own organisations how we give some of that power out to our heads of services, our senior managers and so on, so that they can make those decisions as well. I think the downside for us is that we have too much information sometimes, and we need to really think about what's the problem we're trying to solve and what information do we need that will help us solve that problem. So I know that when we had, I think, our very first meeting of the Frailty Board, we had pages and pages of data, and it was too much. You just couldn't see what you needed. So I think what we will need is really good business intelligence that can pick out the information that we need and translate it for everyone. Because not everyone can look at a spreadsheet and pull out conclusions from that. I think, again, part of the organisational development is how can we best equip people to make the best decisions? And that's one of the key areas where we have the right information presented in the right way so people can understand it. The barriers that we need to work through are when specific organisations have been given specific funding for something, and how we can encourage all organisations to put their contribution into the pot so we can work on it collectively. And often when organisations are given pots of funding, there are performance targets or requirements associated with that pot. So I can understand completely why people will be reluctant to give up the funding. So we need to look at, with that funding, does there come a collective responsibility to meet specific targets as well? So I think it's a work in progress. A lot of us have spent sort of 20, 30 years in our career working in the old way, and you can't change overnight, can you? So I think just keep going, keep the end in sight, which is to make sure that we're providing the right services for the people of Leeds with the right outcomes. It's just sometimes difficult because organisations kind of get in the way, but it's just a matter of history, really, isn't it? All these organisations landed in this particular way. They could have landed in a different way. We have one collective budget to start with. I think it's really important that we look at the power base of all these different organisations. We've got some huge organisations around the table, and we've got some very tiny ones, often from the third sector, that have as valid right to be around that table. So again, something about how we're going to work together, what our behaviours will be, so that we don't put less importance to the third sector providers than we do to the bigger organisations. And the other issue really is around how we ensure there's a patient or citizen voice always with us, making sure that we're doing what people want as well as we quite arrogantly think they need. That is a challenge as well, because it can be tokenistic, or do you have an organisation that speaks on behalf of a particular client group? How do you do that? And again, I think as things progress, we need to look at how we have the best representation for the public voice around the table.